I would like to introduce our speaker, the Reverend Dr. Willard Walden Christopher Ashley, or Will, as he's invited us to call him. His bio has been circulated. I'll just share a couple of highlights. The Reverend Dr. Willard Ashley Sr. is the Vice President of Community Relations, Director of the Center for Clergy Care, and Associate Professor of Practical Theology at New Brunswick Theological Seminary, as well as a minister, a psychotherapist, and an executive coach. His latest book is due out this fall on Judson Press. It's called Rules for 21st Century Radicals. As I mentioned, you can ask questions or signal that you'd like to ask a question in the chat, and after Dr. Ashley's presentation, then we'll have some time to engage with him around your questions. The title of his talk today is Personal, Pastoral, and Prophetic Responses to COVID-19. Welcome.
I'm delighted to be able to share with you that this time last year, I was in Australia and I was meeting with the indigenous Australians. And I bring it up because they mentioned your seminary. And never would I have thought that here we are, fast forward a year later, that we're having this Zoom call and we're talking with one another. And so I was both delighted and embarrassed at the same time that they mentioned the work that's being done in Canada and the Native Australians and didn't say anything about the United States, which was very telling. And so I commend you for the work that you're doing, and I'm glad for those that are involved in this work. And so I thank you. I'm humbled by the invitation. I don't count it lightly that colleagues from the ATS seminary world would say, can you please talk with us? Having served as academic dean for 5 years, I know this is no easy task. Imagine being a leader right now in this environment. Those that serve in the top leadership positions in our ATS schools and universities across the country, across the world, really have a difficult time of it. And so it's my hope that during this time together that I can share thoughts, some things that I've learned, some things I'm still learning. And I take this stance that we are all learners together, that this is it's not the Black Baptist preacher monologue, but it's a dialogue, and that we're talking to each other. I've been a pastor for 36 years, so if you interrupt me, it'll be okay. I'm fine. I preach on Sundays with bacon frying, children crying, and seniors going to the restroom. So interruptions and disruptions, it's par for the course, and so that's not a problem. On a very serious note, we are in a global pandemic, but I need to be very clear that it's global, yet it's contextual, that everyone is not in the same place for lots of reasons, for geography, for social status, demographic, you name it, leadership within our own geographies, own political systems. And so, well, on the one hand, it's clearly global. On the other hand, I want to acknowledge at the very beginning that it's contextual. So my illustrations may come across as one that is an urban, suburban environment, because that's my worldview. If your worldview is different, stop me, interject, or say, where I live or where I am, it's something different. Because again, we want to learn from each other. I'm open to expanding my worldview. I hope that you're open to its expansion of your worldview. The second thing is that I don't know the language they're using in Canada, but here in the United States, they're making decisions what's considered essential and what's not essential. And as an academic, there's pushback on that one because we think that everybody's essential. But that being said, I want to confirm that as academics, as people that are involved in the life of spiritual growth, that you are essential. If no one else said that, to be clear that you are essential. Why? Because you strengthen society. You offer spirituality. in time of need and in time of crisis. And as academics, you push back. You know, you tell the emperor that you're naked, but nobody else does. And so I think that that's very important at the outset to have that conversation. Um, there's a lot of talk in medical circles and in grant world about evidence-based, and that's a struggle for us because if you read Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, everything's not evidence-based through the medical model and through that lens. But nevertheless, in some ways, there are some things that we offer the world that can be put into kind of a rubric of some kind of evidence-based. And so what we offer, and what we're going to talk about in just a moment, is we bring to the table rituals. You know that. We also bring resiliency and recovery, and we'll begin to talk about what it's going to mean to reintegrate, or when we come back into society again, what's the new common experience going to look like? And so I found that just for my own brain, that it's easier for me to talk in threes. And so that's where we get this trinity, if you will, of looking at this through the lens of personal, pastoral, and prophetic. And so if we can just begin there with the personal part. And because we come from different faith traditions, I think there are some things that are common. Lament is in the Old Testament or Hebrew Testament. Lament is something that we experience. It's something that I'm finding day by day that has both pastor, professor, psychoanalysts, that have to give people permission to lament, to be able to say ouch, to cry, to hurt, if you will. And that part of the personal is not only lament, but the losses. I'm in an urban context where in some maybe 10-minute drive from me, we've had congregations where 13, 15 people have already passed away as a result of this virus. I'm in a context where we've lost rabbis and imams and pastors. And so it's not just this pastoral pursuit, but it's personal. Some of these folks and read their book, I did their seminars, I sat at their feet, we broke bread together, and they're no longer with us. So it's personal. It's losses, it's lament, it's learning through this lens as what's personal. I do a lot of coaching now of pastors and professors, and in my coaching, I raise the question: as a result of this pandemic, what have you gained, and what have you lost? And when we start looking at the gains and the losses, it is very personal. I've been saying very tongue in cheek, all of us to get a PhD in Zoom by the time this is over. Between trying to do online calling, online worship services, meetings, etc. My mental health friends put it this way: there's going to be a new DSM category, which is going to be Zoom fatigue. And if they write a check for that, we're going to sign up and make sure that you can qualify. So on a personal level, I know that you offer CPE up in Canada. And so one of the books we used to recommend for CPE students was All Our Losses, All Our Griefs by Kenneth Mitchell and Herbert Anderson. It might be a good resource going forward to help students and help colleagues to appreciate their losses, to appreciate their grief, to kind of give grounding and foundation, if you will. But for us personally, what are we going through in many of the places we find ourselves? We're going through grief. We're going through loss. Maybe you didn't lose any people, but you've lost your freedom. In some cases, we've lost our identity. I don't. Some ATS institutions said we'll never teach online. Mine was one of those. They said that's beneath us. We're not going to do that. You know, as for those other schools, okay, guess what? Fast forward, all of us are teaching online now. And so, as you know, the worst thing we can do to a professor is put her or him in a position where they feel awkward. There are a lot of professors who never taught online before, who are learning on the fly, and it's an awkward feeling. There's a sense of I'm good at everything, which we know is not true, but that's what we tell ourselves. And now you're positioned with, wow, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this. I had a brilliant lecture, but the electronics, the technology messed it up. Now what? So the sense of loss, if you will. We're traumatized. If nothing else traumatizes you, turn on the news and watch the different political factions fight with each other as to what to do next. There's a sense of being traumatized. We're anxious. If we're honest, we're anxious and fearful in ways we were not before. It's allergy season. Sneezing and coughing is normal during this time of year. But now you sneeze and you cough and you go, uh-oh, could it be? And there's a sense of anxiety that rises up within us. I don't know about you, but on a personal level, I'm angry. In the United States, they had a package which was what we call payroll protection plan. Most of the not-for-profits and congregations have not benefited from it. We had the CARES Act was supposed to be for small businesses. The LA Lakers got money from the CARES Act. The Ritz-Carlton got money from the CARES Act. They're considered small businesses. And the mom and pop stores weren't able to benefit. That made me angry on a personal level. There's a sense of shame that comes on a personal level when we're dealing with this kind of piece. And many parents, even those who are certified teachers, are learning something new about homeschooling. It's one thing when you stand in front of the classroom, you give a lecture, but something different when it's your kids and you're conducting homeschooling. And so on a personal level, as relates to this pandemic, we're having to be careful for people like me who resist the urge to pathologize our pain and to recognize that trauma, grief, and loss is normal. It's common, if you will. If you can't sleep right now, you have sleep disturbances. If you have appetite up or down, if you're dealing with headaches and you can't focus, you can't concentrate like we do. Those are all normal reactions at this stage of this pandemic. So we have to resist the urge to pathologize it. Far too early to pathologize what are normal, common reactions to what's being thrown at us. And so I will send this to you, but Harvard posted on their website something that they borrowed from Northeastern University. But I must give them credit. They did give credit that it was Northeastern that came up with it and not Harvard. And and so one of the things that they do in their conversation is that they remind us that in the midst of this pandemic, that we have to take time out every day just to breathe, just to take in the air around us, just to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, that we have to acknowledge the things that make us afraid, the things that cause anxiety, if you will. Um, I'm sure you've heard some variation of this, to recognize that we're not alone, that we're in this together, that we're stronger together, whatever the different kind of catchphrases that have come out, as you're doing now, to create and sustain community. Our dean at the seminary in New Brunswick has the faculty meet every week, and it's primarily for check-in. We do some business. We have to do some business tomorrow, but for the most part, it's really just to see each other. In the beginning of this pandemic, I was one of those pastors that worked very diligently on my PowerPoint to get it correct and to make sure it was lively and entertaining and energetic and informative and all of that. Then I realized it wasn't so important that I got the PowerPoint right. It wasn't so important that I preached the best sermon I've ever preached in my whole life. What was really important was that we come together and we see each other. Even more so in light of hearing all the news of sickness and death and so forth, that we come together and say, wow, I made it through another week. And more importantly, you made it through as well. I'm glad to see you. We're in this together. The other thing that I know that you know, just to let you know that I'm aware of it, is just to unplug, that you can't have this constant barrage of information thrown at us. And, at some point, just say, you know what, I'm going to watch the Hallmark Channel, which oftentimes is filmed in Canada, and I'm going to watch Hallmark or something where I don't care about the outcome. I'm not concerned about if they got the script right, so to speak, just to unplug and to do something different. You do this better than we do in America, but I just want to highlight the value of practicing kindness. I'm anxious now because I'm watching more and more people be more and more aggressive and be less kind. And I realized that part of my role in my faith tradition is to be a model for what it means to be kind. So somebody may be agitated, standing on the line, having to be 6 feet apart, or whatever the government's practice may be, and just to understand that I'm agitated also. I'm not going to make me not be a kind person. To embrace on a personal level the need for sleep, taking care of ourselves, watching our nutritional habits. There's a cartoon floating around where they say the quarantine is over, we can go out into the world, we can finally go out and have fun again. And the couple says, that's great, but we can't fit through the door now. There's this concern that, nervous eating, anxious eating, sitting at home eating, but just being aware that we have to take care of our nutritional health, take care of our mind, body, and spirit, to be mindful of the beauty that's around us. In the midst of this devastation, the trees still bloom, the flowers are still there. We still have ways to connect with nature and to connect that connection. Then the last part on the personal level is just a matter of having gratitude. I reached the age and stage in my life, if I can wake up in the morning, thank you, Lord. If I can put both feet on the ground with a minimum amount of pain, it's a great day. If I actually remember what I'm supposed to do today before I look at my iPhone, it's a wonderful day. And so just kind of simple kinds of things that are out there for us to be mindful of those and just to look at it through a personal level. I'm going to stop right there. I have two others, but do any questions, pushback? Okay, I'll go to the pastoral. We're good? That's a yes?
Can
Okay,
I ask something?
absolutely.
So I'm Pam. I'm using actually your book on disaster spiritual care in a class I'm
Okay.
teaching on the pandemic soon. And I mean, this context in the States and Canada is a little bit different, but I really appreciate some of what you're noting there. One of the chapters in that book really talks about the different phases of a disaster.
That's next.
Oh, is it? And because I'd be
Yes.
interested to hear your thoughts on that in relation to
Yes.
pandemic. Thank you.
You're welcome. I put that in the pastoral piece because the more I thought about it, it could have gone either way, but I put it in the so having looked at the personal, then moving on to the pastoral. One of the things that I've been lifting up is what is it like to be a leader during this pandemic, and what are you learning about leadership, and what are you learning about how you lead? I think regardless of where in the globe you find yourself, we are learning a lot about leadership and what it looks like when you have good leadership, what happens when you have bad leadership. And I'll just leave it at that. I won't be political. But what are you learning about that from a pastoral perspective? And from a pastoral perspective, whether it's academia, whether it's a congregation, what are the risks in reopening? That's a very big topic for us right now because some of the states have already begun a reopening process. Some are thinking about reopening. Some of the congregations in the United States are thinking about when can we reopen. We're being bombarded by our insurance companies talking to us about risk management. If we reopen, what's the exposure for us? So from a pastoral lens, what does it mean to reopen? When you reopen, when you begin to have on campus or congregational meetings, how close will people sit? What will be the new common way of interacting in those kind of settings? So as the question came up, yes, I was fortunate enough to co-edit a book with Rabbi Stephen Roberts. It's our second expanded revised edition, and there's a chart that has been floating around that we included in the book, and it talks about the life cycle of a disaster. Now, if you go on the WHO website, they have the life cycle of a pandemic, and you're saying, so why don't we use that? Because their model seems to be more tilted towards the medical profession and kind of first responders, if you will, and I think that this model, life cycle of disaster, fits us more accurately. It's not perfect, but it gives us some idea of what to expect, if you will. So there are 6 phases, if you will. The first phase is the pre-disaster phase. That's where you get a warning, you get a threat. Who sends out a memo and says, it's coming, prepare yourselves, this is real, it's going to happen. During this pre-disaster phase, what tends to happen is that some of us are in denial. It's not going to happen. It's not going to impact me. It's not going to hurt our country, my state, my city, my municipality. We actually end up acting like teenagers. We're invincible. No matter what happens, we can handle this. If we don't handle the pre-disaster phase properly, then we pay for it, because then comes the impact phase. And if we're not prepared for the impact phase, then we have the pandemic, we have mass panic. In the case of the United States, we have press conference after press conference, just wears us out with press conferences. And very important, and I'll say more about this in the third section, we have power and power plays. And this as academics, the value of language, the value of who gets to name, who gets to say who's essential, who's not. This whole thing of who, if there's a vaccine, who's able to get the vaccine, who can afford the vaccine, the access, if you will. So there's the impact, but we can't fall asleep on all the power shifts and paradigm shifts that are taking place in the midst of the impact phase. The third phase is what they call a heroic phase. That's where we salute, and we salute the MDs and the nurses and the technicians and those that work in hospital in different positions, the emergency responder people, the police and the firefighters, the delivery people, the takeout people, the techs that get us through Zoom, and in clergy and academics. That's the heroic phase. We're applauding their service and what they have to offer. That leads us into this honeymoon phase, where the rhetoric is, we're in this together. We're going to all get through this. We're going to be okay. We're united as one. In the case of the United States, the check is in the mail. The president's going to mail you your check, your stimulus check. You're going to be okay. That honeymoon phase leads to disillusionment. The check wasn't in the mail. Everyone is not going to be okay. We look at Katrina in the United States and look at the articles that were being printed, the research that has been done, that the people of the African diaspora that still live in New Orleans are not better off than they were before Katrina, but other populations have grown after Katrina. So there's this sense of disillusionment. I trusted in government, they failed me. I trusted in other entities, they didn't serve me well. And then the last phase is called reconstruction. In the reconstruction phase is when we have our new realities of what are common experiences. What's the brave new world, if you will? As a psychoanalyst, people walk in the door saying, so am I crazy? And they want a real answer. So that's that sense of reconstruction. I've gotten past my disillusionment. I'm trying to build now on top of. I'm trying to fit into this new world, if you will. I'll take a pause right there and I'll stop. Feedback, any other questions, conversation?
Pam again. I'm
Yes.
going to ask.
Yes.
The disillusionment phase, I think, the whole reality of grief there, I think, too, that some things are changed and aren't going to go back to the way they were. And what is that? And that sort of the long-term implications of what that could mean really starts to settle in a kind of very complex way, it seems, through the disillusionment
Yes.
time.
Yes. And I will add to that, that unlike 9/11, where it happened, now we're kind of recovering from it. This is a long haul. If this is anything like the Spanish flu of 1913, that was a 5-year process. It was 3 years of impact and 2 years of trying to reintegrate and re-enter and figure out what's the new common experience. And depending on which scientists you listen to, they anticipate we're going to get hit again come the fall. And what will that mean? And if it mirrors 1913, the second hit was bigger than the first hit. And so, not to be, a doomsday person, but are you prepared for that? Or do you have the supplies for that, and so forth? And as you said, what does that mean for you emotionally? How do you pull that together? Any other questions on the second phase? Well, not the last phase, but third phase is the prophetic. But I said before, that not everyone's going to be okay. And what does that mean for us as spiritual leaders? It means that we're in the midst of a paradigm shift, that we have to form partnerships, that we have to look at possibilities, if you will. Through the academic lens, I'm asking my students, so what is this pandemic teaching you about power? We just read today in the United States that 6 of our governors are forming a coalition, if you will, so they can buy the necessary resources and equipment instead of trying to outbid each other for the same resources. That's power. So what is it teach us about power? What is this teach us about systems? What are the systems that are working well? What are the systems that are not working well? And for whom are they working? They may be working, but who benefits from these various systems? So the prophetic end, if you will. What are the lessons that we can learn from past pandemics, from past crises and disasters? What is it teaching us? What are the short-term and immediate social justice goals and needs? And again, it's very contextual. It may be very different in Canada. It may be very different in parts of the United States than what I experienced being in the Northeast in a suburban, urban environment. But what are those things that are important for you in your context, that are social justice issues, that are prophetic issues, if you will? And what are you willing to risk to address those issues, to take those issues on, and to be part of that? And again, if you ask me directly, I can tell you what the issues are here in the United States, but I'll just leave it open that they're contextual, and that everybody's not going through, not having to have the same experience, if you will. And I think that's it as far as the broad presentation. If you ask me specific direct questions, I'll be glad to answer those and give you more detail and more content.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ashley. I do have a question. I know some of your very important work around disaster spiritual care has been interfaith and multi-faith. And I wonder if you could share with us highlights of how those interfaith relationships matter in responses to disasters. And does that shift as as you move from the personal to the pastoral to the prophetic, or through the different stages? I'm curious about maybe what we might imagine ourselves doing as a multi-faith community as this progresses.
Good, thank you. So following 9/11, the American Red Cross, what we call the United Way and September 11th Fund, had hired me to design and implement a program for the religious / spiritual community of New York metropolitan area. Small task, easy task. And one of the first things that I did was I said, as a Black Baptist preacher, we sometimes have narcissistic tendencies. I have enough therapy, mine are in check. I don't know what I don't know. I know enough to know that do not know everything about everyone else's faith tradition. I know a lot about my own. I know a little bit about other people's faith tradition. So the first thing I did was I hired faith-specific liaisons and said, I'm asking you to be the expert in your own faith tradition, that what does healing look like? What does recovery look like in your faith tradition? And I'll make sure that you get the funding you need, that you get the resources you need, but I'm not going to begin to know that I know everything about your tradition, or more importantly, what does healing look like for you? So that was my starting point. And we had 5 faith specific um, liaisons. One of them was called the Interfaith Center. The Interfaith Center for New York, they could tell me about the Buddhist tradition, Hindu tradition. They could tell me about the other spiritual traditions that were foreign to me. And as a kickoff, we met at one of the local congregations that was close to the United Nations when they had their opening session before the United Nations opened up. And to the amazement of many of us, they had 50 different faith traditions give an invocation. That allowed us to appreciate that there's more than just 5, more than 3, if you will, to appreciate the rich diversity of different faith perspectives. What we also raised the question was, when we met, who was not represented at the table? And if they were not, why not? If it was on us, let's fix it. If it wasn't on us, still let's fix it, so that every voice matters. That there's no voice that's the big voice and everybody else has to be subject to the big voice, but that we were all equal at the table. And your voice matters just as much as the next person or the next faith tradition's voice. So we took that into account. The difficult part of the whole process was trying to schedule meetings, because if you schedule them on the weekend, it impacted somebody sometimes during the week or certain times during the day when others were at prayer, other religious practices. So that probably was the most difficult part, was trying to figure out how to, within all the different holidays and so forth, how do we schedule meetings? And also, how do we honor each other's tradition? And so at the very outset, we had challenges around nutrition. Is it only just kosher? Are there other meals we have to pay attention to, other dietary needs? And so we use that as a learning experience, not just, oh, well, they're different. No, let's be respectful of their dietary needs, and let's learn about what is it they eat and why, and what is the outcome of that, and so forth. So that was part of our learning from each other. We took turns in terms of offering prayer, in terms of offering, again, our own spiritual disciplines and practices. And so in the midst of dealing with the aftermath of 9/11 and Katrina, we were learners. We were teaching and we were learning, and we were going back and forth. This is somewhat of a trick question, but it's reality. Um, the New York Board of Rabbis hired me after Katrina to supervise their rabbis who were in the Gulf Coast region, in terms of their own recovery and in terms of their own cultural humility. That was huge in 9/11. It was huge in every disaster since that, that we have to approach these pandemics, disasters, with a sense of cultural humility. I know a lot about Teaneck, New Jersey, because I live here. I know a lot about New Jersey, United States, because I live here. I can't begin to say I know a lot about Canada because I don't live there. I visit, but I don't live there. And so a sense of cultural humility, where I'm willing to learn about somebody else's experience, their faith tradition, their culture. One of the things that angers particularly First Nation people of the diaspora, is we fly in with, we know more about where you live than you know about where you live. Really? That's our own kind of cultural academic arrogance, which I do mention in the book, absurdity of arrogance. So that's a whole nother conversation. So having a sense of being culturally humble and willing to learn about somebody else's tradition. That was kind of some of the key components for us kind of post 9/11, Sandy, Katrina, the disasters that we've had here, and the shootings. We've had, I know you had the shooting in Nova Scotia, and we've had our share of shootings as well. And I've been first responder from pastoral standpoint some of those. And again, even though I think I know something, going, as we say, as consultants, you go in dumb, you don't know, and you learn. And even though you may learn, even though you may know, you don't know everything. So that was the approach.
One thing I'd be interested in is just to know any references for some of your reflections on prophetic action, some of those good questions. The whole, what does the pandemic teach us about power? What does it teach us about the systems that we're a part of? What lessons can we learn from that? We're not there yet, I don't think, in terms of living this reality. However, I think we need to be prepared in that kind of a way. As you talked about the Spanish flu and everything, I mean, I think we're in it for the long haul, and that's, at this point, can be quite overwhelming for us to actually ponder that, because day in, day out, we're looking at how we can open things up a bit more. But I think some of this more systemic kind of analysis will be so important to find ways to find some ways to learn from this, so that, because change is going to happen, and how do we harness that in the most proactive way possible.
Thank you. I will send this to you, and hopefully has good academics. If you borrow your site, that you got it from Willard Ashley, and I can tell you in the middle of the night that I got this brilliant idea. And this it's basically the outline of what I went over. And reopening is something that I think we have the power to reopen our little section, but government has the power to open and close larger sections. And so one of the things that has been important to me is, if possible, through your networks, to try to end up on some of these committees or some of the places of influence, that they can hear your voice in terms of reopening, not opening. What does it mean? If you can't get on a committee, to get up to an op-ed piece where your voice is heard and shared, to use the resources you have available and your networks and your influence to speak out, and to recognize that it may not be received with open arms. So one of my Facebook posts was my sense of anger, if you will, that Harvard University, Columbia University, a whole bunch of major Big Ten universities said, in the United States of America, it's too early to reopen. These are institutions that we look to as being, the smart people in the room, if you will. The response to that was, oh, but what do they know? Really? Okay. So that's when you realize that in some cases, it wasn't about science. It was about some other things that were going on. And so I think it becomes important. So I will send you the outline. You can look it over. You can see the places where it makes sense. And I have some references to some articles. I think that during this pandemic, the Walter Brueggemann Prophetic Imagination is a good text to take a look at. I think it pushes us to, I know it's 40 years old, but it's still good. The Bible's even older than that, and it works for us, right? So, old texts need not be thrown out just because they're old. There is a not because I'm a graduate, not because I'm a board member, but Andover Newton has a really good resource and resources on their page, and I will send you that. I don't know if you're familiar with Calvin Seminary and the Calvin Institute. Well, I have that for you, and I'll send that to you as soon as I hang up. This part is contextual, but there's a magazine called The Atlantic, and The Atlantic has a good article which I'll send you, which says the Great Recession is still with us. And it talks about the economic impact of the pandemic and what does recovery look like. I know that certain political people don't like this newspaper, but the New York Times has a good article, which I'll send you that. It talks about the year ahead and what to expect in the year ahead, what to have. And then PBS has something that I'm going to do that's one of your pieces, where it says that you're unlikely to return to normal until there's a vaccine. And so what does that mean for you as Canadians? And what will that new normal look like? So it's all, as soon as I hang up, I will shoot that over to you so you can have that to look at as well. And you should also receiving the chapter 7 that I co-wrote with my colleague Susan Lockwood, which has some other resources and websites and things, and kind of pushes you and talks about grief and recovery. And that part of what we do is that we're triage, that whether it's on Zoom now or once we back to face, that we see people, we interact with people, because we interact with people to be able to say, you know what, this person doesn't look the same. They need some additional help that I can't provide, but I can refer them to a mental health provider, refer them to the proper place. When we did the Care for the Caregivers Interfaith Project following 9/11, we had 25 support groups, clergy support groups of 8 people per group, and that helped us to be in a space with like-minded people and to share our day-to-day, to share our thoughts and our fears, our struggles, our conversations, to let our hair down, so to speak, and just be normal people. I'm not Dr. So and so, I'm not Professor this, I'm not Reverend or Imam, I'm just a normal person trying to struggle to get through this just like everybody else.
Thank you for calling our attention to resources to help challenge our prophetic imagination. Um, that will be important for us moving forward as a school. You know, so much of this is sort of figuring out how to sort of regroup and do what we do. And we're also a theological school, and that's the kind of voice that we want to have, and the kinds of voices we want to amplify.